The area we are going to talk about today is shrouded in secrecy, and for that reason it has become the focus of conspiracy theorists. Is it a hiding place of aliens and weather control technology? Or is it merely a location where the USA develops highly advanced military machinery? It is often referred to as a black site, where black projects take place, with black basically meaning highly classified. Today we'll look at one of the most mysterious black sites in the world. In this episode of the Infographic Show, what do we know about Area 51? We are told it's called Area 51 because it was named that in some documents pertaining to the Vietnam War. The Central Intelligence Agency gives it a far less mysterious name and calls it Homey Airport and Groom Lake. This is a restricted area in Nevada about 83 miles northwest of Las Vegas. In 1955, the site was first used for flight testing, but what happens there now is largely unknown. The down-to-earth theory is that the US conducts secret military exercises there, which includes the testing of weapons that are in development. The reason it remains so secret, of course, is because the US doesn't want any of these experiments falling into the hands of its real or possible enemies. Before we get into any of the more outlandish theories about Area 51, we'll tell you what we do know for fact. First of all, it's a restricted area, but according to most sources we can find, it is not as heavily guarded as you might expect. You can follow a dusty desert road close to the area, but at some point you'll find no entry signs that warn trespassers they could take the brunt of deadly force if they go any further. It is patrolled, but not as aggressively as you'd think, and it's more likely you'll be told to go back or receive a fine rather than be shot at if you wander into the site. You can't fly over it, and if you attempt to fly a drone over there, you will no doubt get in trouble. According to some sources, the area is surrounded by cameras and sensors, with one website stating the base knows every desert tortoise and jackrabbit that hops the fence. You can get up to the gates, however, and you'll have to follow the aptly named extraterrestrial superhighway to get there. We found there is even an adult entertainment club called the Alien Cat House just west of Area 51. What we are trying to say is that it's not as off the grid as you might think. Okay, so we now know what kind of place we're looking at, but what happened there in the beginning? It was a child of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. The US wanted to test its military equipment in a far-off place. The military wanted personnel and engineers to go and work there, and for that reason, so we are told, they gave it the nice-sounding name of Paradise Ranch. The first testing would be of a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft known as the U-2 program. Soon the locals would spot weird things in the air, or pilots would see strange high-flying aircraft, and this is where the speculation started regarding aliens and such. Because the government could say nothing about this, the UFO theories seemed almost credulous. Since then, all manner of covert operations have taken place at Area 51, which you can find by looking at declassified documents. These include building and testing the Bird of Prey Black Project stealth aircraft in the 90s. There are too many projects to mention, but no doubt aircraft are still being secretly built and tested there today. The latest developments are all secret, but you can check those declassified documents to see what went down there in the past. According to one expert, he believes present projects involve more exotic forms of radio communication, directed energy weapons, and lasers. So what is all the fuss about? Well, some people believe it's much more than a place where aircraft is developed and advanced weapons tested, but a site where the USA's biggest secrets are kept, such as where the moon landings were filmed and faked. It's not the moon landings, however, that have attracted the most attention. It's aliens. If you've seen our show on Roswell, and those people that say they saw aliens at the Roswell site, one might wonder what happened to our little green friends. Well, perhaps they were taken to Area 51 and still remain there now. Does that sound crazy to you? It might sound crazy if you haven't heard of the name Bob Lazar. Lazar is a 59-year-old American engineer that told the world he had worked on reverse engineering several flying saucers. He made this public at first under a pseudonym when his face was blacked out in an interview on American TV in 1989. He also claimed he had been given briefing documents explaining that he'd be dealing with aliens from the southern constellation of Reticulum, and that these aliens had been on Earth for around 10,000 years. To power their aircraft, they used the unknown element 115. Lazar's critics say he falsified his academic records, but Lazar says they were wiped by the government. The only evidence is his testimony, but it must be said he is now a businessman and has no history that we can find of mental illness. In a recent interview, he said, "Look, I know what happened is true. There is no doubt, period. Of all the conspiracy theories, this has the most credibility, only because this supposed whistleblower seems to have no reason to lie and does have a background that could put him inside Area 51. Whatever the case, his words certainly kicked off years of speculation as to what goes on in there. From that point on, many people, without entering solid proof, have said that the site is riddled with underground tunnels leading to warehouses full of alien technology and even captured aliens. But not all the theories involve big-headed green men on a protracted vacation to planet Earth. Others believe a group called the Majestic 12, who we discussed in our Illuminati show, actually disseminate alien stories about the base because it's really being used to hatch their plan of ruling over the world. Aliens are a cover, a diversion story. How will they rule the world? Well, they might start by depopulating the planet. One of the conspiracy theories out there about Area 51 is that it is the place where weather control is developed and practiced. Before you get carried away, we should mention that many projects of the USA have been involved with weather control, including Project Cirrus and Project Storm Fury, and while these were benign, who's to say similar weather control projects couldn't be used more nefariously? That's what the doomsday believers tell us anyway. What about the fake moon landings? Why was that flag waving in the wind when there is no wind on the moon? NASA says it's because the flag was being twisted by Buzz Aldrin. Was filmmaker Stanley Kubrick in on the deal? Much cheaper to hire him than actually go to the thing. There are countless theories out there stating that the landing was a hoax, but these have so far all been debunked. We don't have time to go through them all, but you can easily find them on the web. One of the non-conspiracy related issues involving Area 51 is that around the site there is a lot of radioactive waste and people have actually died from radiation poisoning. Civilians who work there have complained of rashes, racking coughs, or dreadful skin conditions. This has led to lawsuits being filed. In 2013, the LA Times called this the real cover-up. So yes, the American government is certainly working on some very experimental things in Area 51, and what goes on in there is kept secret for a reason. It's anyone's guess as to what is happening as you are watching this show, but there can be no doubt it is related to destructive forces. You may have your own theories or can provide more information as to the conspiracy theories, but we certainly cannot find any competing evidence that supports some of the more outlandish stories.
September 20th, 2019, the day that the people of Earth discovered that the US government has been hiding the presence of extraterrestrials from the public. Our millennia of intergalactic solitude has finally come to an end, and the greatest question ever asked by science has at last been answered. Are we alone? For decades, the people of Earth have been visited by aliens from another planet, who have worked in secret cooperation with the United States government. These aliens have crossed the vast distances of intergalactic space with mind-bending technologies in order to mutilate cows, show up as blurry blobs in videos, and conduct experiments on abductees, involving probes in very uncomfortable places. The truth is no longer out there. It's finally here, or in the open. Or perhaps September 20th, 2019 will merely be the day that many hundreds of misled people get arrested for trespassing by the US government, earning hefty fines, long sentences in a federal prison, and ending up with experiments involving probes in very uncomfortable places of a totally different sort. Today we're going to look at the phenomenon that has swept the internet, the massive plan to raid Area 51 and plunder it of its alien secrets, and turn to a friend of the show and former security expert for the US military as he tells us why storming Area 51 is a terrible idea. On June 27th, a Facebook event hosted by 3 different Facebook accounts appeared publicly, entitled simply Storm Area 51. They can't stop all of us. The event would later be claimed by a Maddie Roberts as having been started in jest, but the joke very quickly caught on and went global. As of this writing, 1.7 million people have signed on to the event, and another 1.3 million are interested. The official date is set for September 20th, 2019, for the hours between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. While Roberts has come forward and explained that it was a joke, he did so only after the event skyrocketed in popularity and out of fear that should something really happen, that the US government would be looking for him for being the ringleader. He wanted to publicly declare that the event was a joke and he was in no way serious about storming Area 51. Whether he was serious or not is likely not to matter come September 20th, with the event gaining popularity around the world. While most people signed on to the event as a satirical joke, it's clear from the Facebook page for the event that there are plenty of people who see the opportunity to rush the secretive restricted area en masse as a way to at last plunder its secrets. The rallying cry of "they can't stop us all" has made many people take the event seriously, and it's now feared that on September 20th a large group of people will make a serious attempt to enter the secretive base. Recently, the US Air Force sent out a message addressing the online joke, warning that any attempts to illegally access the area is highly discouraged. So could enough people breach the secret base's defenses? What would happen if they did? And why all the hoopla over Area 51 anyways? Area 51 is situated in a remote corner of the Nevada Test and Training Range at Groom Lake, which is a large expanse of desert where U.S. pilots hone their abilities dropping live and dummy ordnance on ground targets. It was so remote, in fact, that it quickly became the premier destination for developing new and advanced planes for the CIA and the U.S. Air Force. It was, for instance, where the infamous U-2 spy plane was originally developed, a technological marvel of its time which flew so high that it was for years out of reach of Soviet fighters and missiles. The facility was also the home of the infamous Skunk Works, a group of engineers who developed some of the world's most advanced airplanes, and from which the likes of the SR-71 and the F-117 came from. Any other information, to include if the legendary Skunk Works still operates from the site, is difficult to verify, as the entire facility remains a highly classified secret, and the US government barely even acknowledges its presence. Satellite imagery of the site, though, shows that indeed several buildings and flight lines have been constructed, and curiously enough, a flight line long enough to land even the biggest aircraft developed anywhere in the world is clearly visible. Others claim that you can see in some satellite images how the flight lines lead to underground bunkers, though the veracity of those claims is dubious at best. If alien life was visiting planet Earth and the United States government had in fact gotten its hands on some of that alien tech, or was cooperating with aliens, it seems that Area 51 would be the ideal place for such activity. The site is notoriously remote and difficult to get to, miles away from any road and difficult to spy on due to the mountains that border it. But could you penetrate it, and if you did, what would happen? Our expert warns us immediately that any attempt to penetrate a restricted military facility comes with serious consequences. This isn't Stranger Things, this is real life, and trying to get into a restricted area can land you with serious jail time, huge fines, or worse. Trespassing on a restricted military facility can carry a penalty of up to 10 years in federal prison and is often accompanied by a fine of tens of thousands of dollars, which you will be obligated to pay before or after your prison sentence. Naturally, though, the condition of your trespass is often taken into consideration, with our expert telling us that if it's clear you were inadvertently trespassing, then you would likely simply be apprehended, searched, debriefed, and then driven back to a point outside of the facility and be freed to go. If, however, your trespass was purposeful, you might get the book thrown at you, specifically if it seemed like your trespass was malicious in nature, as in you were actively trying to steal government materials or secrets. Different restricted areas have different levels of secrecy, however, and some places, termed Black World facilities, are so secretive that your trespass and ensuing trial are all kept under the strictest of measures of secrecy, with no details of your trial becoming public knowledge. No, you're not tried by some secretive shadow court and condemned to the dark side of the moon, but rather your trial and everyone involved, including your lawyer and any witnesses, are all forced to sign extremely harsh confidentiality agreements with very, very strict penalties for breaking them. That is, of course, if you are arrested, because our expert tells us that there is one more option for dealing with trespassers, and that's to simply shoot them. No, this isn't Soviet Russia, where you can get shot for just hopping a fence to a military base, but our expert warns us that there are concentric rings of security around restricted facilities, and if you penetrate deep enough through those rings of security, you eventually hit one ring where deadly force is authorized, no questions asked. Of course, these areas are always very clearly marked by signs which state as much, so there's no chance you would wander into an area where you could just get shot for being there with no authorization. You would have to make the choice to continue pushing forward, despite the risks. The reason why these harsh measures exist is simple. Some secrets are so vital to national security that the government cannot risk their being discovered by foreign governments. Take, for instance, the Manhattan Project. If knowledge of how to build a working nuclear weapon was discovered by the Germans, the entire course of the war may have taken a radically different route. If you manage to penetrate the outer layers of security and get to those shoot first, ask questions later areas, then it means that you're there on a mission and you're likely seeking to cause great harm to the US. So what would happen if you joined 1.7 million people in rushing Area 51? Would you get to see dem aliens? First, our expert tells us that you would run into a sign warning you that you're entering into a restricted area. and typically warning you of the penalties for doing so. Most secretive government facilities aren't behind huge fences, as that would be far too obvious a giveaway, but rather they rely on extreme remoteness and large tracts of empty land to discourage anyone getting too close. Throughout this seemingly empty landscape are security patrols dispersed throughout the first 2 outer rings of security, and even if you don't see them, odds are that they see you. Armed with high-powered visual aids, night vision, and thermal imagers, these security personnel are vectored in on trespassers by sensors hidden under the ground, pressure sensors buried under avenues of approach, and seismic sensors throughout the entire outer perimeter give alarm operators perfect situational awareness of the miles of empty landscape surrounding the secret facility. And typically a host of hidden high-power cameras allow them to spy on any portion of their perimeter. If trespassers are detected, they're typically allowed to wander through the first outer perimeter of security without being intercepted. That's because these areas are so large and remote that people wander in and out by accident all the time. And the security personnel at the facility prefer that you never even find out you had inadvertently strolled into somewhere you weren't supposed to. The entire time you're in the first ring of security, though, you will be closely monitored from afar, sometimes even by air through drones, and likely not have a clue that you're being spied on. If, however, you continue forward, you will reach the second outer ring of security, much smaller than the first outer ring. The second ring is continuously patrolled by security personnel on foot or in vehicles, and penetrating it will result in a security patrol being immediately dispatched to apprehend you. Our expert tells us that you likely won't get too far through this second ring of security, as you'll have been carefully observed the entire time you approached it through the first ring. A patrol will move to your position and apprehend you, search you and your vehicles, and typically debrief you or just move you straight back to the outermost perimeter and warn you not to return. Should you somehow evade detection or capture, though, you'll reach the inner ring of security, or at least the inner ring of the outer security zone, because there remains one more inner ring that's within the facility buildings itself. Here, movement of personnel is highly restricted, even amongst the personnel who work at the facility. And even though you may have the clearance to work at one part of the facility, you may not have been cleared for any other part of the same facility. In this inner ring, though, even the base staff have to be on high alert against straying where they don't belong. For you, a complete outsider who doesn't belong at all, straying into this area could be deadly. It's here that signs warning the use of deadly force are placed, and while it can be up to the discretion of the security commander or even the individual patrol that discovers you, you really don't want to press your luck. Remember, only really bad guys would be interested in getting this close to a secret facility, so any responding security personnel are going to assume that you're out to cause some serious harm to the US. We cannot stress enough how dangerous it would be to penetrate this area. These are all, of course, the outer layers of security, and inside each facility our expert tells us that even more stringent security measures exist, with even greater repercussions for violating them. He would not elaborate on inner security measures, but did tell us that many times the guards restricting access to the facility might themselves not have a high enough clearance to be inside the facility itself. That's how seriously classified some facilities are, and an entirely different team of guards with an even higher security clearance may be assigned to work the actual insides of the facility. Though our expert would not comment much on the inner workings of restricted facilities, he did leave us with this story. I was assigned to a facility with 2 outer doors, each with a more stringent set of security measures to verify your identity before you could pass. The outer door was open to the outside world, and the second door, where I was located, was inside a small room connected to that first outer door. There was a scanner machine that worked automatically, and my job was twofold: ensure nobody trying to access the facility messed with the machine as it verified their identity and credentials, and if the machine ever set off an alarm, I was to immediately terminate the individual attempting entry. Once the machine granted entry, I was not allowed to look inside the open door and had to stand with my back to whatever the door opened up into. After speaking with our expert, it's clear that storming Area 51 would be a terrible idea. While group posts claim that they can't stop all of us, our expert warns that yes, they very much have the means and firepower to stop even a major incursion event, and that if whatever is inside Area 51 is of vital national security importance, then they will do just that. He warns us that the most sensitive of these facilities were designed to stop a full-scale military assault. Also, though he would not go into specifics, our expert told us that in all likelihood, even if you managed to defeat the outer security, you would simply be never able to access the actual facilities themselves, as part of their security measures include the ability to completely lock out the outside world.
If you've seen our shows on Roswell and Area 51, you already know some of the theories out there that support the position that aliens have already visited our beautiful blue planet. In Roswell, for instance, some people believe that aliens crash-landed and little green men were quickly taken away. Where are they now? Area 51, some conspiracy theorists tell us, and they have been used to help the American military create highly advanced military technology. But these cases are just touching the tip of the extraterrestrial iceberg. Today we'll dig a little deeper. In this episode of the Infographic Show, what is the likelihood aliens have already made contact? We'll start by noting that many stories make the rounds regarding whistleblowers who confessed that they have proof that we have been in touch with aliens, and many other stories are just plain old alien sightings. These may or may not be true. Many stories get debunked, and others are too preposterous to even gain traction. It's up to us, as amateur internet sleuths and part-time alien investigators, to look through the evidence and ascertain an opinion. We might take the case of former Lockheed Martin engineer and Area 51 scientist Boyd Bushman, who confessed on his deathbed that we had made contact with aliens. He even had photographs to prove it. He said two types of aliens were here on Earth, describing them as wranglers and rustlers, the former being friendlier than the latter. He said in his confession, which is available on YouTube, that a great deal of information should be lifted up from those dark recesses of Area 51 and moved over so people can see them. We watched the video, and he at least seems convincing. He shows photos he acquired of an alien craft and one of a 4.5 foot to 5 foot tall alien with 3 backbones. He said at least 18 of them exist within Area 51. These aliens, he said, are telepathic. The problem is, the only evidence he has are these photographs, and as critics have pointed out, the pictures he holds up look like alien dolls that can be purchased here on Earth in stores. Many people decry this man as a loon, even though he was a highly intelligent engineer with patents to his name, while others have suggested that he was probably just suffering from senility. Of course, conspiracy theorists will tell you that this is just a smear campaign and that the smear further supports the existence of aliens. But the tale gets stranger when you invoke another Area 51 engineer who also said he had worked on alien technology, mainly reverse engineering alien spacecraft. His name is Bob Lazar. He is still alive and still stands by what he first said in 1989, that Area 51 was the location where several alien spacecrafts were kept. He also said aliens had been around on Earth for at least 10,000 years. Lazar is the person mainly responsible for starting the Area 51 conspiracies. While his educational background has come into question, Lazar has stated that the government wiped all his educational records to undermine his claims. We should add that former President Bill Clinton has also said he wouldn't be surprised if aliens had visited Earth, and said he'd even sent his people to Area 51 to look for signs of them. He concluded in a TV interview, "There are no aliens there," but that won't appease the believers. You can hear more about Area 51 on our dedicated show. All this may sound even truer if you saw the recent anonymous video stating that NASA was about to tell us a big secret, that it has discovered the existence of aliens. But Anonymous didn't actually tell us what NASA was going to say, and according to most media, its announcement was based on the fact that NASA has found lots of new planets in the last several years thanks to the Kepler telescope launched a few years ago. According to NASA, 20 of those planets are similar in size to Earth and could possibly sustain life. NASA calls the location of these planets the habitable zone, as water would not freeze there, nor would it burn up. But we should reiterate, Anonymous has yet to say anything to make us believe contact has already been made. So what about those people who say they have been up close and probed by aliens, what we call alien abduction? In a denunciatory manner, deceased American comedian Bill Hicks once pondered, why is it that aliens always land in rural America? They cross galaxies, or wherever they come from to visit us, and always end up in places like Fife, Alabama. Maybe these are not super intelligent beings, man. Maybe they're like hillbilly aliens, said Hicks, and while that was a joke, it should make us question the strange phenomenon of these abductions happening around the same areas in the United States. Is it hysteria? Psychosis? Well, psychological studies have shown that people who said they were abducted were not mentally ill. people have reported being abducted all over the world, but America easily leads the way. Are any of those abduction stories convincing? There are too many stories to mention, but most are similar. People are abducted, usually adults, then probed, sometimes taken on a tour, and then sent back. One of the most famous cases was that of American couple Barney and Betty Hill, who said they were abducted in 1961. The aliens, apparently from the Zeta Reticuli star system, had kind of mesmerized the couple as they were looking at its spacecraft while driving in a rural area. Moments later, they were 35 miles away, feeling all dazed and confused. Hours had gone by. The lapse of time became known as the missing time. It was only later that Betty recalled in her dreams that she had indeed been taken aboard the spacecraft and probed. The thing is, Betty's story, both fully conscious and under hypnosis, was not always the same, and later in life, she said she had seen aliens again on several occasions. Skeptics also believe that Barney only went along with Betty's story after she had told it numerous times, and it's believed Betty was a lifelong UFO fanatic. Even these days, you can find many people online that claim to have been abducted, but as of yet, there is no evidence that proves this is not merely a fantasy. Until there is, we must remain skeptical. What about the most credible sightings of alien spacecraft, aka UFO? These don't always come from Reddit users stating they saw something that no one else did. Sometimes they come from more than one person working in a professional field. We might look at the case of what was described by a US Navy pilot as a giant flying tic-tac. Navy Commander David Fravor said in 2004 that he witnessed a white tic-tac about the same size as a hornet, 40 feet long with no wings, just hanging close to the water. Other pilots saw it too, and even filmed it. Fravor said that it was faster than I'd ever seen anything in my life, adding, "We turn around, say, let's go see what's in the water, and there's nothing, just blue water." No one has said the video is not real, and indeed, the object looks like a massive tic-tac. In fact, after the video emerged, a Pentagon official leading a program to search for UFOs said, "My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone." He said his team had found mysterious aircraft that seemingly defy the laws of aerodynamics that couldn't, in human engineering terms, have the technology to fly. But they did fly. The flying tic-tac and the Pentagon being so candid is probably the best evidence we have of aliens having visited us, but still, it's far from being indisputable evidence. Motherboard interviewed a man named Peter Davenport in 2017. Davenport is the director of the National UFO Reporting Center. If you see something strange in the sky, you call them. He says sightings have shot up in recent years, stating that most calls are serious-minded attempts to describe some type of object that the witness was unable to identify himself. The callers could sometimes be drunk and seem unreliable, but many calls come from people who hold positions of authority and are deadly serious. One such call came from a retired military fighter pilot who'd also been a commercial airline pilot and an astronaut. The caller said he'd seen a large, orange glowing orb moving rapidly overhead. In fact, if you read through the dialogue of numerous calls, you might just become a UFO believer. However, if the truth is out there, it's not exactly on our TVs, walking on the White House lawn and having cups of tea with the Queen of England. Given that so many planets surround us, and given the sheer fact that it would be ignorant of us to say we are the only ones existing in the universe, it would be foolhardy to deny the existence of aliens. Then again, it's also unlikely that if they had landed here, the authorities could prevent those aliens from being seen more widely. And if the aliens are that advanced, surely they could evade capture or even mess with our TV signals.
UFOs and alien encounters have been reported since antiquity. Yet in the 1950s, an explosion of UFO sightings rocked the planet and continue to this day. Although they are often harmless events, there is a darker side to the UFO phenomenon: the alleged abduction or visitation of human beings by alien visitors. Hello, and welcome to another special episode of the Infographics Show's Greatest Mysteries. Today, we're taking a look at the alien abduction phenomenon with two of the most convincing cases of all time. Many abduction stories tell of aliens performing medical tests on their human test subjects, but some claim that the aliens are also interested in our mating habits, or perhaps require our help in creating a race of human-alien hybrids. Whatever the reasoning, some alien abductees report sexual encounters during their abduction event, and few are more well known than the first recorded abduction of the modern age, the abduction of Antonio Villas Boas. In early October 1957, Boas began seeing strange, bright lights in the sky around his family's farm in rural Brazil. On October 5th, just before midnight, Boas spotted a bright white light in the sky as he opened his bedroom window to get some fresh air. Later that night, after sleeping for a bit, Boas awoke and discovered the same light in the exact same position. Yet, as he looked at it, the light suddenly began to move toward him at a frightening speed. Terrified, he slammed shut the window shutters and woke up his brother, and the two watched as the bright light shined through the closed shutters before leaving. The light reappeared 9 days later when Boas and his brother were out working in the fields at night to beat the daytime heat. This time, the light hovered about 300 feet above their head and moved from one end of the field to the other as the brothers approached to investigate. Suddenly, the light disappeared, as if having been turned off, though Boas suggested that the light may have simply lifted up and rushed away while he wasn't looking. The next night, working in the fields alone, a reddish light zoomed out of the sky towards Boas at incredible speed. Before he could decide what to do, it had already stopped directly above his head, and Boas could see a craft that looked like a large, elongated egg. 3 legs extended from underneath it as the craft began to descend, at which point a terrified Boas ran to his tractor. But upon reaching it, the tractor and its lights suddenly died. While Boas was fleeing for his house, a small figure suddenly grabbed his arm. According to Boas, the figure was dressed in a full body-length suit of some kind, with an elongated helmet and what appeared to be breathing tubes connected to its bodysuit. Shaking off the figure, Boas turned to run again, but was surrounded by 3 figures who overpowered him. Boas was taken to a flexible metallic rolling ladder, which whirred him up and into the spacecraft. Once inside, he found himself in a small, brightly lit square room. The aliens grabbed Boas and held him in place while they undressed him, and despite his opposition, the aliens seemed to take care not to harm him or damage his clothing as they patiently removed it. All the while, the aliens communicated between themselves, with Boas describing the sounds as some kind of animalistic grunts. The sounds were so foreign to Boas that when interviewed later, he had a difficult time describing or recreating them. Once naked, the aliens applied a clear liquid to his body, likely a disinfectant, and took blood with a device from his chin that left small scars later noticed by doctors. At this point, Boas said he was left alone for about an hour until suddenly a nude female figure entered the room, described by Boas as human yet with features that, although beautiful, were not quite right. A device in the ceiling emitted a puff of smoke that made Boas nauseous initially, but he thought it acted as some sort of aphrodisiac. After engaging in intercourse with the alien woman, Boas was allowed to dress and return to his farm, but not before trying to secretly steal a small device from the ship as proof of his experience, which caused one of the aliens to react very violently. Boas's story could easily be dismissed as fantasy, if not for the incredible amount of detail and his great reluctance in his telling it. It took Dr. Olavo Tifontes, professor of medicine at the National School of Medicine in Brazil, to convince Boas to go public with his story, after which he did to a journalist and a member of the Brazilian military intelligence. Along with the incredible amount of detail Boas offered about the aliens, their wardrobe, and the craft itself, Boas was also found to be suffering from radiation poisoning, as he exhibited a plethora of other physical ailments for months after his experience. Was it an actual alien encounter, or was it the wild fantasy of a bored and possibly very lonely farmer? We'll let you decide as we move on to our second alien encounter. Made famous by the Hollywood film Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton abduction story has become a hotbed of controversy. On November 5, 1975, Walton and 5 other loggers working in the Arizona wilderness piled into a truck for the drive home after a hard day's work. Minutes later, the crew spotted a bright light coming from behind a hill. Filled with curiosity, they drove closer until they could see a large silvery disc hovering just above a clearing. While the others stayed in the truck, a fascinated Walton leapt out and ran toward the disc, ignoring the shouts from the rest of his crew to get away and come back. As Walton approached the disc, it suddenly began to make sounds like a loud turbine and wobble from side to side, scaring Walton, who then began to back away. According to one of the men on Walton's crew, a beam of blue-green light shot out of the disc and struck Walton, sending him sprawling backwards. The terrified crew immediately put the truck into gear and hightailed it off the mountain and immediately called the police. Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison answered their call and came to meet the men, saying later that all of the men were distraught and 2 were in tears. Although skeptical of the story, he said if they were acting, they were awfully good at it. Within hours, a police search of the abduction site discovered nothing, and the next day an exhaustive search involving horses, helicopters, and jeeps still failed to discover anything. At this point, the police grew suspicious of the logging crew, believing the abduction story to be a cover for an accident or a murder. A polygraph test administered days later indicated that the men were not lying about their UFO sighting or that they had hurt Walton. Days later, a disoriented Walton called his brother-in-law, Grant Neff, from a public phone. Rushed to a hospital, Walton relayed a story of being examined by aliens similar to the popular greys described by other abductees, and having an encounter with a strangely human-like male and female alien who would not answer his questions and at one point anesthetized him. A medical examination discovered a small puncture mark on his right arm consistent with a hypodermic injection, but it was nowhere near a vein. His urine also showed a lack of ketones, which, if Walton had indeed been without food as he insisted, and as his weight loss suggested, should have been present as his body began breaking down fats in order to survive. To this day, Walton's story remains the stuff of controversy, with Walton failing a polygraph test on the TV game show called The Moment of Truth. Skeptics believe the entire story was made up for publicity, and also because Walton and his crew were severely behind in their logging contract. Walton's alleged abduction allowed them to secure an extension from the Arizona government. However, Walton's crew remained adamant for decades after the incident that the entire story was true. Even the police who first responded to their original frantic telephone call for help remarked at how visibly shaken and distraught the men appeared to be that night. Are aliens real? And if so, do they really routinely abduct humans for research? Should we be concerned? And should our governments be doing more to try to protect us from this terrifying threat? It's ultimately easy to dismiss alien abduction stories as mere fantasies made up out of boredom, for attention, or to get oneself out of trouble. But sometimes the physical evidence can be perplexing and begs the question, just how did a 1950s Brazilian farmer working his fields in the remote countryside end up with radiation sickness, skin lesions, and a host of other perplexing physical ailments?
Man has been pondering the existence of aliens for some time. Even in ancient Rome, the poet Titus Lucretius Carus talked about not being alone in the universe. But throughout history, a person had to be careful about speculating on the existence of otherworldly beings, given they might be called a heretic or crazy for doing so. No one really knows exactly when the little green men first appeared on the scene, but we could say that it was the 1950s that was the heyday for fictional stories about aliens, sometimes at the helm of flying saucers. This was an era of many sightings, and it seems those little creatures often chose the USA to do a flyover. One particular incident stands out from them all, and that's what we'll talk about today. In this episode of the Infographic Show, evidence that aliens did come to Roswell. It was the summer of 1947, and the people of Roswell, New Mexico, in the USA, were about to get the shock of their lives. It was a quiet place then, and still today there are only around 50,000 people living there. What occurred, though, became such a cause célèbre that the place has kind of been turned into an alien-themed city. But what exactly did happen? Well, if you look at the front page of the Roswell Daily Record on July 8, 1947, the headline for the main story was, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Now that's the kind of headline that these days might elicit most people to say the words fake news, but back then people were dead serious about the possibility of there being aliens in their midst. It all started on a hot afternoon when a rancher found some debris in his sheep field, and that debris, many people would speculate, was from an alien ship. What did this wreckage consist of? In 2013, The Guardian published a story about the death of a man called Jesse Marcel Jr., and he said he had gotten his hands on that debris as his father was part of the investigation. He'd lived an exciting life, traveling the world talking about the debris and aliens in general. His wife said this of him: he was credible. He wasn't lying, he never embellished, and only told what he saw. Both son and father believed the debris was not of this world, being taken aback by a strange-looking purple beam with hieroglyphics on it. There were also lots of metallic sticks, reflectors, and strips of a thin glossy material. What on earth could that be? The Air Force said there was nothing strange about it, and the wreckage was merely that of a weather balloon. You can see the pictures, however it certainly doesn't look anything like a weather balloon. But was it parts of a flying saucer? Many people seem to think so, and accuse the military of a cover-up. Matters weren't helped when the Air Force started doing dummy drops in the area throughout the 50s. As if they were purposefully stoking the imaginations of the local people, the Air Force started dropping dummies from planes that had latex skin and aluminum bones in order to better understand how pilots might survive high altitude falls. But the thing was, shiny dummies dropping from the sky after weird wreckage was found in a field just made people think something was amiss. Again, the military didn't help matters by being so secretive. Not only was it dropping these dummies from the sky, it had been working on something called Project Mogul. This was top secret and involved using high-altitude balloons carrying low-frequency sound sensors. The military hoped these sensors, when flown into the tropopause, would be able to record through a sound channel for thousands of miles, thereby enabling the US to spy on the Soviet Union's nuclear program. As you might guess, they were made from futuristic-looking material and not something most people had ever seen before. The New York Times said the following about these balloons. It was like having an elephant in your backyard and hoping that no one would notice it. According to History.com, what the rancher found in his field was one of these balloons, described as a 700-foot-long string of neoprene balloons, radar reflectors for tracking, and sonic equipment. The problem was that even those working at the Roswell base didn't know about this very top-secret project, so even for military men, that strange debris looked alien. Advanced technology to spy on Russia was of course a cat you just couldn't let out of the bag. It didn't help matters when the people that did know about the project made up the feeble weather balloon story, which even to the untrained eye was an obvious lie. We might also add that the military didn't say anything about Project Mogul until the 1990s. Sounds fishy, eh? So that's the official story, but it's a story that has been called by many the biggest alien cover-up the world has ever seen. There are many reasons why this is. Firstly, the military's reputation was at stake, and making up a flimsy story about a weather balloon doesn't really make any sense. Those initial investigators were intelligent men, and to think they would have been mistaken about an object not from this world is perhaps not congruent with their expertise. It would be the same today if military investigators made such a claim and then the big dogs at the Pentagon just told us that the whole thing had been a mistake. The officers actually put themselves, their careers, and their reputations on the line. Saying they had found an alien object was a big deal, and as we know, at least one of those investigators died believing that that's what they had found. So we must take this into account, the fact that serious people who understood military hardware said they'd found part of an alien ship. They had nothing to gain from making the story up, in fact, they had a lot to lose. To strengthen this point, we might look at the nuclear physicist and UFOologist Stanton Terry Friedman. He was one of the main investigators, a supremely intelligent man and not some part-time armchair conspiracy theorist. He eventually left the military and spent the rest of his life studying UFOs. He has testified in front of Congress and written scores of papers explaining the existence of aliens and their machines. He believed that something called the Majestic 12 group of politicians, military people, and scientists had covered up the incident at Roswell, and a document titled Operation Majestic 12 that described the incident in detail was very much real and truthful. Others, including some UFOologists, have called these papers an elaborate hoax. The FBI investigated the case and stated that the Majestic 12 didn't even exist. One of Friedman's most famous quotes is this: "The evidence is overwhelming that the Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled vehicles from off the Earth." He's not alone. The man that drafted the original press release about finding a flying disc was named Walter Haut. He wrote a book called The Roswell Incident, and in his later life he swore in an affidavit that he had seen an egg-shaped alien spacecraft, but also that he had seen alien bodies, short dudes with large heads. He said there had been 2 crash sites, with bodies only at one of them. He had always been reluctant to talk about what he had seen, and it wasn't until 2007 when he stunned people with his explanation. Some people believe this confession to be of great importance, but others are skeptical. Why come out with this so late in the game? Well, some say it might have something to do with the fact that his daughter runs the UFO museum in Roswell, and she might have benefited from his candidness. His words are just that, words, and in spite of fake videos showing us alien bodies, no bodies have ever been photographed or filmed. So, there are no photographs, but it also turned out that many Roswell documents were destroyed by the government. In fact, in 2016, John Podesta had tried to help Hillary Clinton open the case again and find all the original files by invoking the Freedom of Information Act. The files had disappeared, but it was clear there'd been some investigation by the Air Force, said Podesta. However, a story in The Guardian in 2011 noted that the FBI routinely destroyed files because in the 40s and 50s there were so many UFO files that they were taking up too much space. One note that wasn't destroyed was a memo written by Special Agent Guy Hotel, the head of the FBI's Washington field office. He sent it to FBI boss J. Edgar Hoover, and it stated that 3 flying saucers were found. He also wrote, each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture.
According to the National UFO Reporting Center, since 2014, there's been quite a drop in the number of people that have reported seeing alien spacecraft. But prior to the 1940s, there's little evidence of people saying they saw unidentified flying objects. Then we got the space race and mind-blowing technologies, and people not only started saying they saw UFOs, but some believed they had been abducted by aliens. This was the dawn of a new era of alien conspiracies, with Roswell perhaps being the best known of them all. When video technology became easily accessible, we also saw many films of strange objects in the sky, and perhaps even the most skeptical amongst us could be swayed toward believing they were watching aliens. Let's now try to find out what could be hidden from us in this episode of the Infographic Show. Is the US military hiding aliens? We won't spend too much time on Roswell because we've done that already in our show, Evidence That Aliens Did Come to Roswell. But let us recap at least what went down in the small town in New Mexico. If you looked at the Roswell Daily Record on July 8, 1947, you'd have seen a headline that said the Roswell Army Airfield had captured an alien spacecraft. The US government denied that this happened and said that in fact pieces of what looked like to some a UFO was actually a weather balloon. Nonetheless, it was reported by some that the debris consisted of a 700-foot-long string of neoprene balloons, radar reflectors for tracking, and sonic equipment. Was this a cover-up? Well, the USA at the time had been developing advanced military machinery, and there is no doubt at all that many of these developments were top secret. The USA didn't want the Soviet Union knowing what it was working on, so things had to be hush-hush. The weather balloon story just didn't cut it for many, including much of the media. But that didn't mean the USA was hiding aliens. Rather, secret things were happening, and so at times cover-ups took place. You also had respected physicist and ufologist Stanton Terry Friedman saying there was a cover-up, and he really did believe a UFO had landed in Roswell. He said there was something called the Majestic 12, a group of powerful men that knew all about the existence of aliens. He wrote, "The evidence is overwhelming that the Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled vehicles from off of the Earth." The FBI alluded that he was delusional. Maybe you believe that this man and other conspiracy theorists were delusional, but then you might take note that when in 2016 John Podesta wanted to release the Roswell files under the Freedom of Information Act, they were missing. The files had disappeared, but it was clear there'd been some investigation by the Air Force, said Podesta. Sound fishy? Then you have the area in Nevada where the USA develops new technologies, the place known as Area 51. We know black projects happen there, but we don't exactly know what. Again, it's in the interests of a country to keep such things secret, but as long as there is secrecy, there will be paranoia and conspiracies. The alien conspiracy certainly heightened when a man called Bob Lazar appeared on US television in 1989, saying he worked in this area reverse engineering several flying saucers. The question is, was he delusional too? With this in mind, we at least need to investigate further. In 2017, the New York Times reported that the Pentagon was spending $600 billion on defense, but there was a mysterious $22 million spent on the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That is cash spent on looking for UFOs, and where that money went exactly remains a secret. The Pentagon has admitted that this program existed, but then also said it was closed down in 2012. The shadowy program, parts of it remain classified, began in 2007, and initially it was largely funded at the request of Harry Reid, the Nevada Democrat who was the Senate Majority Leader at the time and who has long had an interest in space phenomena, wrote the Times. The paper added that much of the money in this program came from a billionaire entrepreneur by the name of Robert Bigelow. He has gone on record saying he is absolutely convinced that aliens have been here on Earth. He says the program has indeed included documents that say sightings of UFOs have happened, and those objects moved at very high speeds and showed no signs of propulsion. The program also included information about the mysterious oval object that in 2004 was being chased by 2 Navy FA-18F fighter jets. Scientists, however, told the Times that one should not rush to the conclusion that every strange moving object is an alien spacecraft. Rather, sometimes natural phenomenon can look like a UFO. We're also told that flying objects might not always want to be seen, and sometimes they are not aliens but flown by humans. In the 1950s and 60s, the USA had something called Project Blue Book. That project told us thousands of objects were seen flying through the sky, but often those were other countries' spy planes, clouds, or just conventional aircraft. We're also told that 701 of these objects, in that project at least, were never properly explained. So we know that the US has a certain amount of black money and that the cash is spent on seeing or understanding alien technology. This is a fact and no one is denying it. Space.com talks about the secret project too, telling us that a man who ran the program for a while went on record saying there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone. This is not some conspiracy theorist. This is a man that worked at the higher echelons of US intelligence. He told CNN that some of the aircraft being studied in the program were displaying characteristics that are not currently within the US inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of. Some reports say when he left his job in 2016, he did so because he was annoyed that the government wasn't taking aliens or the threat of aliens seriously enough. Then we have the Mutual UFO Network, and the people working there believe we are on the brink of something big regarding UFOs. This group of people are at the forefront of UFO research and have studied over 100,000 UFO reports over the last 50 years or so. Their conclusion is without a doubt UFOs have been seen, that the technology is fantastic, and that we can learn a lot from those technologies. Our military vaults are full of such videos and data on these objects. Now that the spill gates have been opened a little, it's time for the rest to come out in an orderly fashion, said the network. But there are still skeptics. One writer told Space.com that while we might come across alien spacecraft, the $22 million the USA spent was not much in the bigger scheme of things. He believes there are a few curious minds in the government, but that's it. Nothing is being hidden from us. All you have are a few UFO believers in and outside the government who were able to get away with funneling a few million Pentagon dollars to themselves for UFO research and have very little to show for it, he said. What we have perhaps as the best case for a UFO is that amazing footage of the US fighter jets following some kind of object. It seems that many experts say that this is some of the most compelling evidence. After that, we have the Times report, which was in some ways groundbreaking because it proved the US government was looking for aliens. The Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program was about the nearest thing we have to the X-Files, or at least is the nearest thing we've been told about. What do the Brits think about this? In 2017, The Guardian reported the same story as everyone else, that the US was looking for aliens and wasn't denying it. But the British government in 2010 also released its own UFO report. We're told that this consisted of around 6,000 pages of documentation, but nothing in there proved the existence of UFOs. British UFO expert Nick Pope read all these documents and said there's a great deal of mundane correspondence between the MOD and the public, together with the vast number of UFO sightings which are clearly aircraft lights, satellites, or meteors. But there is some more interesting material. Indeed, some of the events he mentioned have remained something of a mystery. He said that it's now time that everyone realized that both the UK and US governments are taking aliens seriously, maybe more seriously than ever. Like our US colleagues, we too denied, even to Parliament, that we were undertaking secret studies into the UFO phenomenon and consistently downplayed the true extent of our interest and activity at the Ministry of Defense, he said. That said, the British MOD closed down its UFO hotline in 2009, stating that no sighting over the years had led to anything substantial. The American Department of Defense said it closed its program to use the funding for other projects. It did say this, though, to the media in 2017. The DoD takes seriously all threats and potential threats to our people, our assets, and our mission, and takes action whenever credible information is developed. Unfortunately, boys and girls and alien enthusiasts, besides the USA admitting that there is black money and black sites, we don't have much to go on. We have some interesting videos, and we have very few supposed whistleblowers who might also be crackpots. We had a cover-up in Roswell, but it wasn't a cover-up of alien existence. It was just more secrecy from an already paranoid government. What we at the Infographics Show think is that the US government isn't necessarily hiding information pertaining to the existence of UFOs, but it does work under the veil of secrecy. That's it. That's all, folks. There's no big conspiracy to keep us unaware of the truth. But of course, we don't know that for sure. So we'd like to know what you think about this. Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, What Happens in Area 51. Thanks for watching, and as always, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.